When Vladimir Putin launched his full-scale invasion of Ukraine, he miscalculated in more ways than one. Chief among them was his belief that Europe was too divided, too complacent, and too disarmed to mount any serious response. He assumed that the West would stumble over its own bureaucracy, hesitate in fear, and ultimately allow Russia to redraw borders by force. But what's unfolding now across the European continent is something far different from what Putin had anticipated, and it's shaking his strategy to the core. Europe is arming itself with a speed and seriousness not seen since the Second World War. The momentum is seismic, and it is leaving Putin paralyzed, cornered, and increasingly desperate. Countries like Germany are making defense commitments that would have been unthinkable just a few years ago. Pledging up to 5% of its GDP for military spending by 2032, Germany is not just reacting, it is transforming. Poland is moving even faster, planning to reach 4.7% as soon as 2025. France and the United Kingdom are also accelerating their hard power capabilities, preparing for a future that now includes the credible possibility of direct confrontation with a revanchist Russia. What began as a brutal invasion of Ukraine has evolved into a tectonic shift in European security posture, one that Putin neither foresaw nor prepared for. Western intelligence agencies now suggest that Putin is in a corner, scrambling for leverage and beginning to show signs of hesitation. John Lauf, head of foreign policy at the new Eurasian Strategies Center and NATO's former first representative in Moscow, has provided invaluable insight into the evolving crisis. Speaking to Times Radio on May 22nd, Lauf explained that Putin is navigating a geopolitical environment that has dramatically shifted beneath his feet. The assassination of former Ukrainian official Andriy Portnov in Madrid on May the 21st is just one of many signs pointing to Russia's increasingly erratic and aggressive attempts to project power. Portnov, a former advisor to ex-President Viktor Yanukovych and a man sanctioned by the US for alleged corruption, was shot dead in broad daylight. 5 bullets, 3 to the head and torso. The implication, Lauf suggests, is twofold. Portnov may have outlived his usefulness to the Kremlin, and at the same time, his murder could be Russia's brutal way of reminding Europe that it can still operate within its borders with impunity. Yet these gestures of menace only hint at the deeper crisis gripping the Kremlin. Putin, Lauf notes, is under more pressure than he lets on. The Kremlin's outward narrative of Russian success in Ukraine, of steady advances and inevitable victory, is increasingly a mirage. The reality on the ground tells a different story. Russia's army is grinding forward, yes, but at a punishingly slow pace and a devastating human cost. In April, Russia captured only about 67 square miles of territory, according to the independent military analysis group Deep State. Even the more optimistic estimate from the UK Ministry of Defence places that number at just 77 square miles, gained at the rate of a little over 2 miles per day, with daily Russian casualties estimated at over 1,000 soldiers. The losses don't stop with manpower. Russia's military is hemorrhaging equipment, its defence industry straining to replenish supplies. That's why Lauf argues that the war is taking a toll on Russia that is unsustainable in the long term. Despite having the strategic advantage of numbers, the pace of Russian advancement is painfully slow and tactically inefficient. Putin can see it, and so for the first time he is beginning to acknowledge the possibility that the war might not end in victory. His phone calls with former US President Donald Trump, highly unusual in tone and timing, suggest a man looking for off-ramps. Lauf believes Putin is attempting to manipulate Trump into influencing the US to reduce its military aid to Ukraine, which could shift the balance in Russia's favor. But this strategy is a gamble. Should Trump fail to deliver, or should Europe continue its military expansion, Putin finds himself in an increasingly untenable position. This pressure is internal as well as external. Loff emphasizes that even if Russia's economy can weather Western sanctions for a while longer, it faces production bottlenecks in its military-industrial base. Entire categories of equipment are being destroyed faster than they can be replaced. If Putin wishes to push deeper into Ukraine, a massive expansion of his armed forces would be necessary, something that could only be achieved through another round of national mobilization. That too is fraught with danger. The last partial mobilization in 2022 triggered a mass exodus, with 1 million Russians fleeing the country. The lack of popular enthusiasm for the war is glaring and dangerous for a regime that depends on the illusion of control. And then there's the psychological toll. Loff describes Putin as a man grappling with uncertainty and struggling to find direction. Following a recent 2-hour phone call with Trump, Putin appeared before the press, unscripted, hesitant, his body language betraying the weight he carries. For the first time since the war began, he spoke in terms of compromise. Both sides, he said, would need to make concessions, an astonishing shift from his earlier maximalist position that demanded Ukraine's complete capitulation and dissolution as a sovereign state. Why the change in tone? The answer, Loff argues, lies in the growing realization that Europe is not only resisting, but transforming into a credible military power. Putin once saw Europe as weak, fragmented by domestic squabbles and reliant on American protection. But now he sees a continent awakening. Germany's plan to hit 5% of GDP spending on defense, announced by Defense Minister Boris Pistorius and echoed by Foreign Minister Johann Wadephul, is nothing short of sensational, Loff says. Even hitting 3% wouldn't be enough, German leaders admit. They now recognize that their previous levels of spending were woefully inadequate for the threats they face. The implications are profound. Europe's most powerful economy is now aligning its military priorities with its economic might. Germany, long criticized as a soft touch, is becoming the backbone of a new European defense posture. Other nations are following suit. Poland is pushing to 4.7% defense spending as soon as next year and is building new anti-missile infrastructure. The UK plans to increase its own military budget to 2.5% by 2027, with potential for more. France aims to reach 3.5% despite its budget constraints. Taken together, these shifts represent a historic departure from decades of European military underinvestment. The broader picture confirms this trend. According to the Stockholm International Peace Research Institute, European defense spending hit $693 billion in 2024, a 17% increase from the previous year. Russia accounted for $149 billion of that amount, meaning Europe now outspends Russia by $544 billion annually. That financial imbalance is growing, and Putin knows it. The latest round of EU sanctions, adopted on May the 20th, strikes at the heart of Russia's oil revenues and its so-called shadow fleet of ships used to evade sanctions. An 18th package is already being prepared, one that could sever 20 Russian banks from the SWIFT system and dismantle the Nord Stream pipeline entirely. All of this is isolating Russia further, deepening its reliance on China, and reinforcing the sense within the Kremlin that its strategic options are narrowing. Loff observes that Putin seems to be thinking about succession, something he has never publicly considered with such frequency. In recent interviews, Putin has hinted at contemplating his future beyond the presidency. His term ends in 2030, just as Germany will be reaching its defense spending peak. Perhaps Putin's endgame is to negotiate a ceasefire or a peace framework that allows him to save face domestically and bow out before the full consequences of his war come home to roost. But if that's his plan, time is running short. Europe is mobilizing in ways he never imagined. Sanctions are biting deeper than expected. His army is bleeding men and material, and the Ukrainian resistance, though battered, remains defiant. Putin's fear is no longer just about losing in Ukraine. It's about facing a Europe that, for the first time in generations, is willing and able to fight.